The HAVENBELL Trilogy, Book 1, The Child of Harmony, Chapter 4, Fairy Island. Flying northwest, they approached Fairy Island. It was larger than Maylene, but smaller than Fathia. There were many trees. It almost looked like Maylene, except for the colorful flowers and numerous butterflies. Like she had been told before, there were fields upon numerous fields of all varieties of flowers, most of which she had never seen before. Farisif landed between a row of daisies and tulips and let Trillium down. They pranced through the space between the rows where nothing grew. They wouldn't want to trample the delicate things. They smelled sweet to her, and they took turns smelling them. They felt full of life. "This is a wonderful place." Trillium was impressed. She had thought the glass castle a marvel, but this land was most enchanting. Farisif picked a daisy, although he knew not of its name, and placed it in Trillium's long curly hair. She smiled at him, sat down, and motioned for him to do the same. He did. Trapped in each other's eyes again, they were unaware of someone approaching. A hand rested on Farisif's shoulder. He jumped, a bit startled. It was a woman, the fairy woman from Trillium's dream. She wore a fancy dress full of wonderful colors and designs. Her long, straight brown hair hung below her waist. "My name is Eternity. I am the Chantress. Who are thee?" her voice sang. In return, they introduced themselves to the fairy. "I welcome you, Child of Harmony and Prince of Josephera, although strangers are not welcome here. The Dark Ones have been killing fairies by the dozens. We have no protection against them, and strangers make us very nervous," Eternity warned. She was a large fairy, about 5 feet tall, and one of the last of them alive. She was very pretty. Her light blue eyes sparkled. "Queen Esmeralda would have been pleased to see you, but now you have gotten yourself into quite a fix." "What do you mean?" "It is unlawful to pick any flower in these fields. You have committed quite a serious crime." Farisif began to worry a bit, but was relieved to see Trillium's reassurance and strength in her eyes. He wondered how she could be so calm at such an uncomfortable time. "What's going to happen to me?" he asked. "Usually, being a stranger and picking our most precious flowers, you would be subject to face the queen and her court. You would be sentenced to the most severe punishment, but there may be a way to escape your capture." A drum sounded from behind the trees. Another large fairy appeared with a drum that hung from a strap over his back. He approached Eternity. They looked like they could be brother and sister, their eyes the same sky blue. She remembered that all of the Adrella had blue eyes. They watched the fairies with delight as they were entertained. "I haven't heard music for many summers," Trillium told Farisif. Eternity began to sing with Garrett's drum. She sang songs of the fairies and about reuniting the creatures. Although the strangers did not quite understand the song and all of its meaning, they enjoyed it immensely. The 2 large fairies grew silent, and the drummer approached them. The music had made Farisif as well as Trillium forget about his crime. The male fairy was darker than the Chantress. He had friendly eyes and a sophisticated look about him. His hair was dark brown and dreaded. His hair hung long like ropes to the middle of his back. He came towards them and knelt next to the 2 strangers. "My name is Garrett. I am the drummer and close companion of our queen." "Are you going to kill us?" Farisif asked. "No," Garrett laughed. "We do nothing of that sort. If the queen sentenced you, you would have to stay and help tend the fields for 2 summers. "He cannot," Trillium rejected. "He needs to help me fight the wizards." "I understand that you are the Child of Harmony and have duties to fulfill, but your friend has broken a very serious rule and cannot go unpunished. There is only one way that you can be forgiven and be on your way. Will you take my offer?" the drummer asked. "Yes," they both answered together. "The guard will be here shortly to take you to the queen. Follow me." Garrett led them out of the flower fields and into the thick of trees to the west. He took them into the center of Trick Forest where they would not be found. When they reached the middle, Garrett stopped, and they all sat down together. The drummer opened his medicine bag that hung loosely from his neck. He pulled out a fairy potion. "What is it?" Farisif asked Trillium. "A potion, I think." "Yes," Garrett replied. "Now drink it, and all shall be forgiven, and you will be free to leave." They each drank half, and Garrett slung his drum around and began to play. Garrett played peaceful rhythms, and no words were spoken for some time. The strangers began to feel quite odd. They could see a glowing aura radiating from the drummer. A green and pink glow surrounded him, and his hands beamed with yellow light that lit up his drum as he played. Trillium and Farisef could now see the life inside the trees and plants around them. When he stopped playing, he spoke again. "I will leave you now, but don't be afraid. I will send eternity to find you in a few hours. Just stay here for now." He stood up with the drum hanging in front of him and tapped away as he left the forest. Trillium had forgotten the urgency in which she must return the shell. All thoughts of her mission faded as the potion did its work. "I feel strange," Trillium giggled. "As do I," agreed the prince. "Very strange." For an hour they walked around together, afraid of getting lost. After an hour of wandering and observing, he sat next to Trillium and put his arms around her. He began to kiss her, unafraid, for there were no eyes upon him now. They made love together in the fairy woods. "We must go." "You do not love me, Trillium." "Yes, but we have duties to fulfill. This may have been a mistake." "There are no mistakes in love." "I have to return the shell. I forgot." "So did I." "I care for you, Farisef, but my mission is not to fall in love. It's to save HAVENBELL. If I must choose, I choose to be the child of harmony." Farisef sat dumbstruck. He couldn't believe his ears. He had never felt so drawn to somebody before. He knew he was falling for her. He thought for sure that she would express her feelings, but being rejected was not what he had expected. Farisef was deeply hurt, but knew she was right. They had already forgotten their mission. "We can't leave until eternity comes to get us. We'll get lost." Nearby, Mutt had accidentally wandered away from Eye's view of his companions. He slipped into the woods, chasing a small, pesky fairy. It had tricked him and flew off, leaving Mutt very lost. For 15 minutes he roamed around and began to give up hope when he began to hear voices nearby. He crept up, positioning himself closer to the murmurs, and gasped when he saw 2 very naked bodies. He saw the green amulet. The feather she was with had one too. Could it be? He wondered, not really wanting to believe it. It was not the girl that he recognized. It was her mother's necklace. It was very royal and maybe a sign of the council. "That's the child," Mutt stuttered. Trillium's stomach did loops. "Someone's here," she whispered. "The wizards are close." This didn't help Farisef's mood. Mutt jumped when he heard this, cracking numerous twigs and branches, completely giving himself away. They both looked in his direction. He was given no power by the Dark Ones and knew the Child of Harmony could kill him in an instant. He ran for help. "Hurry!" Trillium urged. "There is no time to spare." They dressed themselves as fast as lightning and gathered their items. Trillium strung her bow and kept it posed for any surprises. "We can't leave. We'll get lost in here without eternity," said Farisef. "It is even more risky to stay here. They have found us. We must return the shell." They began to walk slowly through the trees. Farisef felt all too unarmed. He searched the grounds for a suitable weapon. After trying 2 branches, he decided on the third that was thick and solid. He had left his sword in Josephera because he didn't think that he would need it or that they would be attacked. He swung it 3 times fast, making a whipping sound as it sliced through the air. He kept it raised in his right hand, ready to fight in case of an ambush. A light sound blew through the air, and it began to get stronger. "Eternity!" they shouted. "Help us!" The large fairy flew towards them. Without her, the way out would be impossible. Fairies were the only ones who truly knew the forest. Mutt, on the other hand, made it out remarkably in a frantic hurry. He ran fast with his head looking behind him and ran right into de Groot. Mutt panted out of breath and barely formed the words. "It's her, master, the girl." "Where?" de Groot demanded. "In the woods." Mutt pointed a gnarled finger in the direction where he had caught the lovers. De Groot raised one side of his mouth into a pompous smirk. His head swam with sick delight. "Stay here. I don't want you screwing this up." De Groot slammed Mutt to the ground. Did she have the shell with her?" "I don't know, master," Mutt muttered, keeping his eyes on the grass below. De Groot pulled out his short sword. It was made of pure silver and shaped like a curved snake. He shot Mutt an evil glance of hatred and insanity. Mutt kept his eyes on the ground, but he could feel the fire in De Groot's eyes. He could feel it through every pore. Behind the fire that danced in his black, empty eyes lay only two things. Mutt knew very well what those were: rage and murder. De Groot fled off into the forest like a madman. One phrase echoed over and over in his head like a bad song. "I want her for myself. Oh, how I want her for myself." Eternity led them through the trees. Trillium and Phariseth walked back to back, scanning the surroundings with weapons alert. Trillium noticed that her awareness of the dark presence was much weaker in Fairy Island, the reason she could not figure. De Groot crept into the forest, not venturing in very far, before he could hear the voices, and lowered himself down into the brush. He hunkered down low and covered himself with a couple branches and vines. He could not disappear like his father could, but his skin changed and his mind could change other creatures' awareness of him. He was nothing but a pile of shadows in the dark. He hardly even breathed. In a couple of minutes they would be out of Trick Forest. De Groot heard them coming and could hardly hold his excitement. He stabbed Eternity. She collapsed and hit the ground. This put them both in complete shock. For a moment they forgot what their weapons were for, as well as their names. "I didn't see him. I didn't even feel him." "That should be enough power to create another murder of crows, the ones you slaughtered." Phariseth rushed to Groot and swung his heavy branch, but before it made contact, De Groot raised his pasty white palm at Phariseth and sent him flying backwards through the air with invisible force. His back hit an old but solid fir tree. He was knocked out cold. His head dropped like a lifeless marionette. "I'll kill you, wizard. You better believe I will." She aimed her bow at De Groot. "You stupid girl. I have been waiting to meet you, and this is how you welcome me? By telling me that you are in control here? You cannot even compare to my power. I will crush you and you will fail. If you are lucky, I will make you a slave." The arrow sliced the air like a flash of lightning. It cut through De Groot's shoulder like a sharp knife through paper. "Ah!" He reeled, trying to throw her like he had Phariseth, but he could not move her. She was strong as stone. The amulet around her neck began to shine, a bright beam of green. The pulsating waves weakened De Groot. The light stung his eyes. Trillium did a backflip, landing with the softest of ease, and shot again. This time the silver arrow pierced his thigh and began to throb fiercely. He screamed and limped towards her. She was too fast. She slugged him square in the face, like a brick that has fallen from great height. De Groot's eyes rolled back into his head, and his hung out of his opened mouth. He looked so pitiful lying there that she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She ran to her good companion and began shaking him. "Phariseth, come on, wake up!" He blinked his eyes. Trillium raised him to his feet. "Wake up!" He began to come around, but was burdened by a pounding headache. "We must go now." Phariseth saw Eternity, who lay lifeless. It didn't seem real to him. His head was still floating. Trillium had an arm around him. She felt him weaken and held on to him tighter and steadied him. He saw the wizard laying limp with his eyes now shut. "How?" the prince began to ask, when De Groot's eyes flew open and both of them jumped. Phariseth stood still, and Trillium let him go. She took the shell of hope out of her pack and held it in her hand, facing De Groot. She saw the instant panic in his eyes and smirked. He screamed. She nodded, and Phariseth started to lead the way out. He was an excellent navigator, and his link to this island was much keener than Trillium's. He knew he could find the way out. De Groot made an effort to stand, but his leg had gone numb, and he fell back down hard. His yell echoed through the trees, pushing them along faster. With a few twists and turns, Phariseth found their way out of the woods. Outside of the thick of trees, Garrett stood waiting for them. A brown horse with a black mane and tail stood next to him. They were surprised when he greeted them. Garrett told Trillium to let the horse smell her. She held her hand out and smiled. "What's his name?" "This is Rex." The horse nodded in acceptance. "I am afraid I have no experience with horses." "I will ride with you. We must hurry." Garrett hopped on Rex and Farisef helped her on. Garrett tapped the sides of the horse and Rex began to run. Farisef flew behind them. She realized that Garrett carried no drum. Lars saw Mutt curled up and shaking and went over to kick his ass into gear. When Mutt told Lar about the girl in the woods, Lar became very furious. When he found out de Groot went alone to find her, Mutt earned a blinding smack across the face. "You idiot! She's mine, not his!" Lar charged off into the woods to find them. He dragged his staff upon the ground, making a long trail to find his way back out. On his staff made of cherry wood was a beautiful carved ball on the top. Above it sat a nasty little imp, a most demonic creature and gruesome pet. It had long yellow claws. Its face was twisted and its eyes possessed frightening evil. He rummaged through the dense forest. When he saw the slain fairy, his eyes grew large. Big fairies were very magical. Lar crouched down and let the imp collect small portions of blood. Blood from a fairy would come in handy later. A rush overtook him. De Groot watched him. "She's mine! Don't even think about it," de Groot threatened. Lar saw just how weak de Groot looked and laughed at him. "You are in no position to fight me. Looks like the little girl kicked your ass." "Shut up!" He realized he was not the one in control here and began to get very nervous. "What are you going to do to me?" "Whatever we please," Lar replied, and let out a bellow of ghoulish laughter. "The fairy is mine now," Lar confirmed. The imp jumped from the staff and hopped like a rabbit to de Groot. "Get that thing away from me!" he screamed, kicked, while Lar sacked the large fairy for his return to the cave. Lar then killed de Groot. Less competition that way, and de Groot had the power of moving things. The imp took some of his blood, too. Blood from a wizard would also come in handy. The imp jumped back onto the staff. Lars slung the bag of fairies over his shoulder and followed his staff trail out of the woods. The effects of the potion were almost gone now. It still made no sense to them how the potion had made them forgiven. It was a different land with different rules. They could see acres of flower fields. They stretched to the horizon. No time to learn about them now. The palace came into view. A large white tower stood on top like a large tree. It was beautiful even for being half destroyed. Fairy Island was even more beautiful than Duran had described. They walked up the marble steps, clacking as they went. Many small fairies fluttered about. 2 larger fairies guarded the entrance. They wore blue robes, both of them men. They smiled when they saw Garrett, but they eyed the strangers with mistrust. "Halt! Who are these strangers?" the first one demanded. "Brought here by Queen Esmeralda's request," he answered. "Go." The second one pointed to the door. They walked inside and admired the temple's beauty. Diamonds and crystals hung from the ceiling like a bundle of sparkling stars. Elegant paintings were upon the walls, but unlike the feathers that only had pictures of their own race, the fairies had pictures of all of the creatures, new and old. There were even a couple that neither Trillium nor Farisef could identify. There was a large white door that glittered like Trillium's sandals. Upon it was a carved orchid flower. Garrett pushed it open. The queen sat on her bed with her face in her hands. She looked up startled, the stain of tears on her cheeks. "Who are these?" she asked in her high, dainty voice. Garrett knelt before her, and Trillium and Farisef did the same. No one laughed this time. Trillium bowed and approached the queen. "I am Trillium, the child of harmony, and I have something that belongs to you." Lar and his goblin army traveled across the land. They had caught about 30 small fairies altogether. It was good, but not good enough for Jade's taste. They continued to search for more, but could not find any. All of the fairies had been alarmed by the call of the horn and were now hiding. Lar's smile stretched across his handsome face. The girl is headed towards the palace. We must follow her. She has to be stopped." The goblin army began to rush towards the tower. Mutt was aware that Lar had come back alone. He might be clumsy, but he wasn't stupid. He had a good idea of what had happened to De Groot, and would dare not ask about it. Neither would the slave army, for they too knew the wrath of Lar. "Attention, my wonderful fairies," Esmeralda announced to her people from the second story of her tower. The top was too weak to take the chance of announcing from the usual spot. "Today is a special day for us. May I introduce our new friend and trusted ally, Trillium, the child of harmony." There was a brief silence, and then oohs and ahs came out of the crowd in unison. Then the noise began to escalate into joyous shouts, cheers, and applause. "Quiet!" Lar told his pack of goblins. He could barely make out the words. "The half-breed has been gracious enough to find our long-lost shell of hope. We shall be saved," she rejoiced. "Run, now!" Lar called out. Esmeralda gave the shell to a small fairy that could barely lift it. She flew it to the top of the tower and locked it in place at the top. When it was placed in the holder, a brilliant pink beam covered the sky like caramel on a candied apple. The force field returned and the wizards were caught inside. Their skin began to burn. The goblins screamed. Their skin blistered before their eyes. Lar howled. His skin was becoming flawed just like the rest of them. "Ortus, Noctus, Ortus, Phalenge, de Trimidoc," Lar shouted. He had magic. The fire dragon appeared, but only the fiery surface of him, not his whole form, to let them escape. The eye was still in the hands of the Dark Ones, but the shield of the shell was still painful and useful. The dragon had no power to attack, and that was good enough to satisfy the fairies. Mutt thought for sure they were all going to die, stuck inside the shell's pink aura. Lar had saved them all, and saved the fairies for the brew. As the wizards retreated, their fire burned brightly, and all of the fairies watched as they flew off of the island, leaving a trail of screams behind them. "They will not return. Their days of fairy slaying will stop, I promise you," Trillium told the fairies. "I must go now. I will protect you." The fairy queen pardoned the crowd. They were now very happy indeed. She thanked Trillium. "I have a gift for you, and it is a rare one." They followed Esmeralda and her guards out to the gardens behind her temple. There were large empty fields and meadows where many horses ran wild. Trillium was speechless. She vaguely remembered the horses from Phaethia. Rex was the first she had seen for many summers. Phariseph was silent and strong. He brightened when Esmeralda led them to a small stable. Inside the stall, horses were being cleaned and brushed. In the last stall was a beautiful white horse with a long, wavy mane. "Her name is Ivory," Esmeralda told her, "and she is very special to me. Show them your stuff, Ivory." The horse whinnied, and from its body stretched two massive wings. Phariseph and Trillium were filled with delight. "I have never seen a winged horse before." "Nor have I. Nobody knows of its existence except for the fairies and the council. She has been around as long as I have, and I hope you take very good care of her." "Me? But I have no experience with horses." "She is a Pegasus, and you will take care of her fine. Your friend has wings, and now you do too." "Thank you, Your Majesty. I don't know how to thank you." "You are very welcome. Just protect her well. Creatures shall see her where you go, so be careful." "I will." After a little hesitation, Trillium looked Queen in the eyes and told her that Eternity had not made it out of the woods. "I know," the Queen responded. "I can feel each death of my fairies. She was very loved here. She was my brother's daughter. She died for you. She died for all of us. Now that the shell is in place again, she has saved many others." Hearing that Eternity had been niece to the Fairy Queen was like taking a blow to the stomach. It seemed as if the punishment was higher for picking flowers than killing a well-loved fairy. It had not really been her fault, but she felt it was her responsibility to protect her. She could have lost Phariseph and the shell as well. Esmeralda let them pet and feed Ivory from their hands. They themselves hadn't eaten since the night before, and now it was nearing early evening. Esmeralda invited them both to stay a few days and get to know more of her beautiful island. Trillium agreed despite of what the council had wanted. She was not sure if they wanted her to rush. Now that the shell had been returned, it was time to rest. They needed it, and the journey home would be no picnic. So she decided, yes, a short vacation would be divine. They were fed the best food that HAVENBELL had to offer. Both were impressed by how delicious the food was. With the shell returned, the fairies could now rebuild the White Temple with a little physical labor and a hint of magic. The wizards had gotten close, too close. If the queen had been killed, the fairies would lose their joy and spirit. The Dark Ones would have killed all of them to keep the council from gaining power. Although the shell protected it against the wizards, it still wasn't safe until the eye of the temple was returned. It was what held the main force field. Esmeralda gave them a tour of her palace. Some fairies were working on the damage, and it looked a lot better than before. The fairies were friendly and showed them bundles of hospitality. They were a very merry bunch, and all of them seemed to accept them. The queen brought them down a long, narrow hallway and came to a door on the left where a huge pine tree was carved on the white door. In that instant, she understood how much she missed Maylene. She longed to see her stone house, her garden, and her flowers. She even longed to run throughout the maze again, from start to finish, just for fun. She liked the maze much better now that she was out of it. Farisef opened the door. Inside was a spacious and very dreamy room. This room was untouched by the wizard's fire. Pieces of rock inside the walls made them sparkle with each step. It was a square room with 2 big tombstone-shaped windows that faced west. Trillium looked out at the sunset that left a brilliant pink, orange, and yellow hue on the clouds. The room overlooked the palace grounds, and she could see many flower fields. Crystals hung like stars, and there was a moon mural above it. There was a large bed in the center that had a canopy of flowing lace. Trillium thought the room in Josephera had been nice, but this was incredible. "It's amazing," she told the fairy. "We have been waiting for many summers for you to come to us. You have done so much already. You deserve the best, and now you shall receive it. I shall see you again in the morning. Good night." She pulled some nightclothes out of a wooden bureau and left it for them on a big velvet chair. "Where will I sleep?" Farisef asked. Trillium smiled. "In here. Good night." She turned and fluttered to the door. As she opened it, she smiled at Trillium, then floated away. The door closed. "I hope you don't mind," Farisef asked. "No, it's all right. I would rather have some company anyway." She motioned towards the bed, and they both sat down. "Trillium?" "Yes?" Trillium sprawled herself on the bed and looked up at the hanging crystals. Then she looked at Farisef. She wanted to love him, and she did love him, but knew it would be disastrous, especially after the way the girls in Josephera treated her for wearing their clothes. "Trill, why didn't you kill the wizard in the forest? You were more than capable of it." "I just could not do it yet." "He wanted to kill you." "I know, but I've never killed anyone of flesh. I know I can, but I figured if I crippled him, he would get stuck in the beam of the shell and die anyway. That is, at least if nobody rescued him. I may be a sworn warrior, but I still feel, you know." "Yes, I know." They were getting very tired and decided to rest for the night. Farisef offered to sleep on one of the 3 lush chairs inside the room, but Trillium refused, and his eyes brightened. She picked up the nightgown and draped it over her head. He lay down beside her. They held each other tight as they drifted to sleep. They both had fiery dreams and images of ruthless wizards. Lar returned to the cave with Mutt and the goblins. Jade was getting impatient for her brew, and the others were grateful for Lar's return. "Where's de Groot?" Jade demanded. "The Child of Harmony injured him, and he got trapped in the shield when the shell was put into place." "The girl escaped as well?" "Only temporarily, I promise you." "So de Groot perished from his own stupidity. It doesn't surprise me at all." "Good riddance," Jade smiled. "You old haggard bitch! You would all laugh if I wasn't here, but now we have no master of disguise, so now what?" Nemi began to weep. Jade looked as though fire was shooting from her eyes. "Stop that bawling, it makes you weak," Jade spat. Tolan put a hand on Jade's shoulder. "Calm down, let her be. We will survive without him. We have no choice. We will corrupt their silly council." Well, maybe you can live without him, but I can't, Nemi shouted, then ran to her into Groot's room. I do have a surprise for you. We have 24 small fairies and one big one. From the looks of it, she was very old and special. Lar handed the sack to Tolan. This may be what we need to destroy them, Tolan smirked. Jade lit right up. Mutt, go make some brew. He took the sacks of fairies and began to hobble towards the grub room. Inside was a wooden compressor with wooden cranks and cogwheels that ground and crushed. He started making the brew. The sun rose upon the magic flowers that stretched for over 40 miles across the island of the fairies. The sun's beams danced upon the trees and lit up the remaining snow upon Sprite Mountain to the north. A ray of sun reached the round window in a golden beam. Trillium squinted as she began to wake, her haunting dreams fading away fast like a desert mirage. Farisef lay quiet in sleep by her side. She watched him with curious green eyes. She desired his touch and embrace. She was relieved for the fairy's protection, but her heart often felt cold and empty. The comfort of a man would have helped, but he was one she could never have. Let him sleep a little. She let him sleep a little longer, still watching him. An hour later, they both redressed in yesterday's clothing and went downstairs to meet and eat with the fairies. All of them, small and large, fluttered about the palace, all dressed up in sequin costumes and little dresses with petal-shaped skirts. Roses, daisies, pansies, and tulips danced through the air giggling. Esmeralda took them outside into the front of the palace. Fairy homes sat inside the crooks of the trees. Every fairy within 20 miles was gathered in one big swarm. They danced through the courtyard waving their ribbons. When the two visitors came into view, the crowd began to cheer. What's the commotion? Trillium asked Esmeralda. The queen spoke aloud. Attention, my brothers and sisters. We are gathered together to go on a journey of celebration. We will celebrate three things today: the life of our good friend Eternity, the return of the Shell of Hope, and the arrival of the Child of Harmony. The two of them exchanged nervous glances. We will travel north for 15 miles until we reach Babbitt, south of Sprite Mountain. We shall hold our celebration there. A good number of guards will stay here to protect our shell. We must leave immediately and remember to stay close, my friends. Garrett rode upon Ivory. He wore a long, loose shirt and pants that were splashed with reds and blues. 2 colored bead bands were wrapped around his gnarled brown dreads. His drum bounced upon his back. Strings of flowers hung from it, flapping in the breeze. Garrett approached Trillium and pulled gently on the reins. Ivory looked at Trillium and whinnied a greeting. The rare horse shook her head, waving her long, wavy mane. Good morning, Garrett, Farisef greeted with a smile. Garrett nodded back in a cool, nonchalant way. He dismounted the gentle beast and helped Trillium upon her. I shall lead the way, my child. Be swift, my fairies. She opened her wings and lifted into the air. The swarm began to move uphill to the Great Sparrow Lane. Only the jagged tip of Sprite Mountain could be seen on the horizon. The winter snow was melting fast, as spring was almost at an end. The melting swelled the river of Zane that stretched across the island east to west. The sun was shining hot and muggy. Clouds had moved and the rays broke through. Lightning flashed in patches to the north. The wind was soft and carried the soothing, sweet smell of the flower fields. The fairies chattered and waved ribbons with glee. Trillium rode next to Esmeralda, letting Ivory run on foot. The trip back to Josephera would take a lot of her strength. Farisef flew to her right. 2 big male fairies flew behind the crowd to make sure no one lost their way. They began to sing a song as they rode by fields, laden with all of the colors of the rainbow. The cheery high voices rang out like sacred bells. Garrett sang along, but his drum still had no voice. It lay on his back solemnly. Upon the road we fly and travel, to the hills of Babbitt we shall go, past the forest, through these fields, and the magic that we sow. We are grateful for this earth below us, once a land of war and pain. When humans ruled this land of old, this was a city named Zane. Look upon our precious fields. They are alive and much aware. They grow with some attention, so give each of them a stare. Greetings to the morning glories, rising with the sun's light. Good day to all the partridge peas, asters, daisies, and orchids white. We are dancing with the daylily, singing with the yarrows. We are whispering with pickerel weeds and dancing with the mallows. Take a sip of sugar from a yellow cream cup, pollen of the purest kind for a bee. Let's make a dream of shooting stars and roar with fireweed. We love our hanging columbines and all those bluebell flowers. Our meadow beauties are so rare and hold such special powers. Upon the road we fly and travel, to the hills of Babbitt we shall go, past the forest through these fields of magic that we sow. The child of harmony clapped with delight. This place made her feel so cheerful. The aura of these fairies lifted her happiness and joy. That was wonderful, my friends. These fields are full of splendor and magic. With the shell in place, you and your crop shall flourish again. The fairies chattered. Fairasuf gazed at her enchanting eyes. He got to travel quite a lot, but had not been far from Josephera. He knew this new adventurous life suited him well. His dreams of being a traveler had started to come true. He was allowed to travel anywhere in Josephera and found secret places on land. It was not every day that you were handed an endurance spell. Fairasuf patted his pockets. The potion wasn't there, and he knew he might get sick if they stayed too long. He decided he would not tell her unless he had to. He didn't want to give her bad news at her time of fun. Trick Forest was near now. The path disappeared ahead. The forest grew across the island to discourage strangers from finding the palace through the woods. Unfortunately, the theft of the Eye of the Temple had crippled its power, allowing the wizards to escape them. Esmeralda waved her arms about the air in short circles. 2 bright balls of light surrounded her hands. Her palms rained glittery fairy dust. Everyone watched silent as a wave of great magic shook the trees. It whistled like a howling ghost and made a wave of brilliant yellow light. Ivory shook her head. The trees parted and made a path. The newcomers were a bit startled by this magic. Waves of power surged through the trees, looking like ripples on water. The wind died down and turned from a howl to a whistle, then to silence.